I think people have always been drawn away from confidence for some reason. That people are haters. They want to see you lose. Some people strive to achieve things and some people strive to hate. You know, if you think something, the likelihood of it happening is very slim. If you believe in something, if you know something is going to happen, if you're confident in that situation, you will achieve things in life. That's how you overcome things. That's how you put yourself out there. You believe it and you achieve it. And that's what I do. I know what I'm going to do. I know that I'm better than this.
Sounds like
I
the
know
worst
that I'm going to
self-help
knock him
book you've
out.
ever read. Conceive, believe, achieve. Shut the fuck up.
The following two players that I will mention are on the very same NFL squad. This particular owner owns both of these players, a wide receiver and a running back. So let's get into the two stat lines for these two particular players. Week 1, running back, 19 carries, 48 yards, 2 receptions, 23 yards, 6 total points. Wide receiver, 6 catches, 66 yards, 6 total points. This running back and wide receiver was the first and second selection for this particular owner in the 2023 draft. In 2021, when Paul selected Herbert Eckler and a combination of Williams and Allen, he was the beta test for Jay the following season, Jay's failed season, when he collected Eckler, Herbert, and a combination of Williams and Allen. It was a standard. He knew what to expect when he became the Charles Lee Chargers, because when you select several players from the same team, at the very least, what you can guarantee yourself is that you won't go winless. Number one, you won't go winless, because there has to be a combination of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks out of the season, where they both get points together. You can at least guarantee yourself of that. And what you can also guarantee yourself of is that you are going to have several weeks where nothing happens, where it's mediocre production, where everything is average, because this is the NFL. It becomes a very real situation when you take two players from the very same team. Of course, we've all mentioned Hydras, but Hydras are a bit different when it's just quarterback and wide receiver. A quarterback and a wide receiver are so distant from one another, you know, and when you collect Eckler and Williams or Allen, if the offense struggles, then the likelihood of them having terrible games is it's quite possible. Of course, for an Austin Eckler, a terrible game could be 12 points. But in this case, for this particular running back, a terrible game is 6 points. These two players that I am mentioning are Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs. Yes, selected by the Jokes on You. That's very risky when there was nothing to contrast this combination with the year prior. Maybe Andy had, I believe Andy had both Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs in 2021, but this was a year when Josh Jacobs really didn't pan out. Andy benched him. I don't know if he traded. Well, of course, Andy didn't make a trade, but I believe he did have those two players. But even then, the quarterback was David Carr, and David Carr has the tendency to force feed players just like Aaron Rodgers does. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo has that same tendency. I think he's one of these quarterbacks that if you're open, if he just has a certain vibe with you, he's just going to go to you. And it seems like he has a connection with Jacoby Myers. And of course, this isn't to say that Davante Adams isn't going to score touchdowns and get yardage. Of course, he's going to do better than 6 catches, 66 yards for 6 points. Notice the 6s in his stat sheet. You notice that, and the demonic aura that Pedro's Joker vibe just brings about. You might want to think about that. Alchemy, folks, alchemy. Of course he's going to do better than 6 catches and 66 yards, but what's going to come of Josh Jacobs? What's going to happen with Josh Jacobs? He is not a great player. He had a breakout season last year, but maybe that was working with the offense that was ran by David Carr. But what's going to come of him with Jimmy Garoppolo? And of course, Pedro had a terrible week, scoring 49 points, but this was the genesis here. This could be the beginning of a terrible season, and we have the pleasure of witnessing just the birth, blooming like a flower in the spring season. Isn't it beautiful? Fantasy football is upon us. Oh. Such a beautiful thing. This is your week 1 recap. Bundy here, you there. What we're going to do now is get into the week 1 scores. So what do you say we do that? Team Bundy? Of course, ties with Plathanos, 88 points apiece. And I think the only thing that I can say is, if Josh Allen is going to have 3 turnovers, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble, I'm lucky that I got away with a tie. 8 total points for Allen. Of course, he was my 3rd pick. 8 total points for Allen. And if this is the sort of production that he's going to put up in a terrible week, which results into an 88 tie between Hensel and I, then I'll take it. Some of you may remember that I started off the 2022 season with a tie against, of course, the tire of all tires. That made absolutely no sense. Andy, of course, the man who loves to be tethered to other men. In fact, has the most ties in history with about 7 or 8 ties. I was tied to Andy in the very first week of the season. Now, that's not to say that our season is going to go exactly the same way, and it better not. But I tie this week against Hensel. Joe Mixon, unfortunately, just like the rest of the Bengals offense, did nothing with just 6 points. 12 points from Mike Evans, who got a touchdown. I don't expect Mike Evans to do this every week. I don't. What I would expect is more production out of Allen, more production out of Mixon, and Mark Andrews actually healthy, and that's what would really support my team. I don't expect Mike Evans to go off for, and this isn't really even going off. I don't expect Mike Evans to get a touchdown. And what did he get? Let me see. 6 catches, 66 yards. You see the demonic theme here? 6 catches and 66 yards, but the only difference is he got a touchdown. So if Devontae Adams would have at least done that, then Pedro wouldn't have had such a miserable week. Of course, 10 points from DK Metcalf. Dawson Knox did nothing. And Dalvin Cook with 5 points, which is about 2 to 3 points less than I expect him to get on a week-to-week basis. Now, over on the Plathano side, his good, sound decision to select Tony Pollard, Jay, who now all of a sudden is like, I gotta give him credit. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes would have been a better selection for Hensel. No, that's the obvious selection. A more practical, more solid selection was to pick Tony Pollard with his keeper. Of course, getting 20 points from him, 11 points from Chris Olave. And I also want to mention that Michael Thomas, with 6 points. Wasn't expecting him to do that for me on the other side, but I'll keep a close eye on Michael Thomas for the weeks ahead. Najee Harris is, without a doubt, one of the most troubling selections that Hensel made for the draft. And what selection did he make him in? Let's see. He selected Najee Harris with his 2nd pick. You know, they say that you can't win your fantasy draft with your first few picks, but you can certainly lose it in your first few picks. And if the Steelers offense doesn't have, they face the 49ers. That's pretty much one of the best defenses in the NFL. It was a tough week for everyone on the Pittsburgh team, just like it was a tough week for everybody on the Bengals squad. 3 points for him. And fortunately, he got 12 points from the Eagles defense. I think that's really what put him over the top. I think the Eagles defense had started out with a 20. They ran one back for a touchdown. And I was glad to see that got minimized a bit. But we tie up nonetheless. What are you going to do? Let's move on to Acknowledge Me losing to Ricky O 64-62. The very amazing moment in fantasy history with Aaron Rodgers getting hurt within the first 4 plays of the game. Amazing. I think the last time this happened to someone losing their number 1 drafted quarterback was Joe when Tom Brady had that injury. I think it was in was it in Kansas City that he had that ankle injury many years ago on the very first week, and Joe lost him for the whole season or most of the season. But that was the last time I remember something like this happening. But it was never just so satisfying. It's so satisfying to me for Ed to be somebody who intentionally hates the way that he does, and for something like this to happen to him week 1. Not to say that Aaron Rodgers was going to be a quarterback 1, because Ed can replace him with Aaron Rodgers, and we'll get to his replacement in a second. He can replace him quite easily, but it was his intent to play the Jets' offensive players, and now one of those columns has been knocked out, and he is gone for the whole entire season. You almost sort of hope that you would have had a better selection in your 3rd pick than a kicker who only got you 5 points. You almost hope that you would have gotten more support for your team. You can see how that reality is sort of becoming more evident to Ed every day now, that 3rd selection will forever be one of the worst decisions he's ever made in fantasy. Here's what I don't appreciate from Ed before we move forward. What I don't appreciate from Ed is that he trolls, and he does it in this very direct way. But on the other side of that, he's completely absent when it comes to dialogue. And I don't appreciate that. That comes across as passive aggressive to me. That's how I register that. If you go out of your way to troll me, you're no fun, because you hide when it comes time to talk. And what I mean by talk is just an emoji. Like, give me an emoji, give me a GIF, tell me to go fuck myself, anything. But when you go complete silent, when you say nothing, then you actually seem like you thought this was gonna work out for you, which is funnier to me in the long run. It's funnier to me that he says nothing in a loss because he actually thought that this would work out. If he was more of a troll, if he was more like Andy, for example. Andy's really the only person in the league at the current moment that really talks shit other than me. And of course, with good reason, because he's got 2 championships in a row, which Andy was talking prior to that. That's why I could admire Andy more than I could admire Ed, because he only really talks when he has something to talk about. And that is not what a troll covets. A troll doesn't hold on to results, because that's not what trolling is. Trolling is being an unstoppable force. It's being the Joker. Let's bring it back to another demonic reference. 666 Pedro. See what you're doing to this league? A troll is like the Joker, right? It's the unstoppable force against the immovable object, which is Batman. It persists. It keeps going no matter what. It has no motive. It doesn't want practical things like money or victories or belts. It just talks for the sake of talking. So when you go out of your way to select a kicker in the 3rd round, and then all you do is just send stupid, it's not even a proposal. It's just saying, hey, you want this player for that player, just to say it, because what you don't do on the other side of that is actually send me a proposal. And if you continue to do that, Ed, yes, I will continue to send you more absurd proposals. But you can't just speak when you know you've won or when you know you've got to win, because just then don't troll. then get out of the way, because you're clogging up the lane for people who actually just senselessly talk shit for the sake of talking shit. I've lost 5 straight seasons. 5 straight seasons. Have I talked any less? You think it matters to me that if I lose a 6th season in a row, and what I mean by losing, it's not making the playoffs. At this point, it's a victory for me to make the playoffs, whereas 5 years ago, it was a victory for me to just win the whole thing. But right now, we have to be realistic. Making the playoffs is a victory for us. So if I don't make the playoffs a 6th year in a row, do I lose something? Am I less of a person for losing in fantasy? No, it's fantasy! It doesn't exist. It's not real. Step up, say something, send a gift. Come on. What's wrong with you, Ed? You know, I could liken it to poker. You know, I remember playing poker with some of you. I remember playing poker with the commish, playing poker with Joe, and playing poker with Pedro. Pedro was always the easiest person to play against, and maybe Pedro's not aware of that. And the reason for this was Pedro would only play when he had a strong hand. He would fold 3-4 times in a row, and then he'd just raise every, after the flop, he would raise. And after the river, I don't remember the terms. Maybe Joe can correct me because he's the poker expert. After the 4th flop or whatever, he raises and raises and raises. So I flop if I have nothing because I know that he has something. He only plays when he has a strong hand. And a joker, a troll, has to fool you. A troll has to bluff. That's the nature of a troll. You get it? It was harder to play against the commish. It was harder to play against Joe. They were actual jokers because Joe would have the same facial expression when he had, when he just had a high card and when he would have a full house. It was the same expression, and the same goes for the commish. Pedro remembers I would stare at him as I was either gonna fold or match his bet. I would sort of look at him, put my cards down, and then I would fan the pages as if I was reading him, and a smirk would always emerge from Pedro's face, and when he smirked, I would always fold. Always. Because I knew he had a monster hand. And it's the same with Ed. If Ed doesn't have a monster hand, then he doesn't say anything. So, I mean, you can't respect it, You just have to be consistent. That's basically what I'm saying out of all of this. I'm just saying, be consistent. That's all I'm asking from Ed. Of course, he had no production from Jamar Chase, who just amassed 3 points. Garrett Wilson, who had a spectacular catch in the Monday night game with 9 points, 20 points from the Jets defense. And of course, Ed almost won that had it not been for Stephon Diggs' last drive, which Josh Allen was just feeding him. And I think Orlando got about 4 extra points. Brandon Ayuk with 24 points on Ed's bench. And of course, Ed is putting him in the lineup this week. I don't know how that's going to fare out. These San Francisco receivers, one week it's Ayuk, the next week it's Deebo Samuel. You put George Pickens on the bench, and, the Steelers really didn't have a great week. So, that's not really a good litmus test for the Steelers. But, let's see what happens with George Pickens on your bench. And now we get to Ed's replacement. Actually, we'll get to Ed's replacement later. Okay, so Lamar Jackson did nothing for Ricky O with 5 points. Saquon Barkley in that horrible game that the Giants will never forget, 40-0 against the Dallas Cowboys, 6 points for him. Devontae Smith with a touchdown, 10 points for him, 16 from Stephon Diggs. Wow, that's actually a lot better than I thought he did. But 64 points for the commish and 62 for Acknowledge Me. And the only thing that I could say in closing for Ed is this is the result of not selecting a actual player in the 3rd round. Ed had the 5th selection in the 3rd round, and after that was Ramondre Stevenson, Lamar Jackson, Travis Kelce, a keeper, Dameon Pierce, and Aaron Jones. So just within that round, obviously he could have picked any other player picked after that. But just within that round, just take a look at that. Ramondre Stevenson didn't do much for Eric this week, but that's a much more solid selection than picking a kicker. You know, Damian Pierce did nothing for Pedro, was on Pedro's bench, but that's a much more solid pick than picking a kicker. And Aaron Jones just went off. If you would have selected Aaron Jones, he would have gotten the victory. This, you know, I'm playing Thursday morning quarterback, but this is what we said last week. The reason why he lost wasn't just because of Aaron Rodgers. It's going to be the reason why Ed's going to lose close games like this, because you're missing that third key piece to any victory that sort of holds everything up. That 12 points, those 10 points. Instead, you trade it for Justin Tucker, who, you know, he'll just give you 6 on an off week. So let's move on to Rollo Tomassi, who loses 69-117. Highlander, the trilogy, walks away with the very first Kirk Cameron Award for fantasy excellence. 19 points from Patrick Mahomes, 24 points by Aaron Jones. And interesting how Andy got a -1 from Antonio Gibson and has now dropped Antonio Gibson from his team. I don't think Andy should be doing that because Andy doesn't have that much strength at running back. He picks up Antonio Gibson with his 11th pick, and he drops him after a -1. Meanwhile, Javonte Williams is kind of still up in the air, right? He's talented, but he only got 13 carries for 52 yards. Well, let me not say only 13 carries. That's pretty decent. But 52 yards, 4 receptions, and 5 yards. He got 5 total points, you know, along with Aaron Jones. And, you know, are the Green Bay Packers going to play the Chicago Bears every week? No, that's not going to happen. Is Aaron Jones going to do this for a second consecutive week? No, because I fucking said so. Because the Toronto Bundy said so. Tyreek Hill with 33 points, Deebo Samuel with 5. Andy just got, you know, very, great performances from great players. This is why you select Tyreek Hill with your first pick, I believe. He was Andy's very first pick. 33 points for him. Pedro may be, punching himself in the face because he picked Davante Adams before Andy picked Tyreek Hill. So at least week 1, that's definitely got to hurt. Over on the other side, Justin Herbert with 20 points and an impressive debut by Bijan Robinson. He had that very impressive touchdown run. Nothing else really to speak of here. A negative from the Dolphins defense. So a very tough start to Rollo Tomassi's fantasy season. Joelicus Maximus losing 67-99 to Big Papa. I did it again. You got me again. All right, whatever. J-Ray. Losing to J-Ray. J-Ray with 13 points from Justin Fields. Look. This is kind of what I was going to mention about Ed and Anthony Richardson. These two players are in the same pot. I get it. Next week, they can each get 25 points because of what they can do athletically, but they have to create those points. They have to try so hard for 25 points. And Patrick Mahomes has to do so very little for the same amount. So it's not the same thing. It's not the same. You don't have any weapons. I mean, I have Anthony Richardson's very best wide receiver in Michael Pittman. And by the way, Ed, you can send me a trade for him if you're going to continue starting Anthony Richardson, which of course that depends on this week. If Anthony Richardson gets a 10, then Ed's not going to start him again. See, that should be your indicator of your replacement. Your indicator of your replacement is, if he has a terrible week, am I going to continue to start him? And if the answer is no, which I'm pretty sure it's no for Ed, because if he gets a 6 from Anthony Richardson, you know, that very well, that might mean that he loses again. He's not going to start him again. He's going to pick up somebody from the player pool. I think he should have picked up Purdy, in my opinion. But Justin Fields is in the very same predicament here. That's why I don't like this. I don't like what Jay's doing. Jay, I'm going to tell you this week 1. I'm going to tell you it week 2 if he gets 20 again. He has to create this. He has to try so hard to get what Patrick Mahomes has to do very little for. J.K. Dobbins, fortunately, gets hurt for the rest of the season. You know, I have to say that you guys have you've done so much for me this very first week, because when I tell you that, you know, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room, Ed took it to another level. Right? He didn't exactly get hurt before he left the locker room, but shortly after he left the locker room, he got hurt. And J.K. Dobbins was at an Achilles injury as well, but he's gone. Brian Robinson with 11 points. Of course, Justin Jefferson, who goes out there later tonight with 15 points. 16 from Calvin Ridley, who I said Jay might have drafted a little too early, but of course there was hype around Calvin Ridley. So if he did it week 1, of course he's going to continue to do it every single week, right? That's what we expect to happen here. Deshaun Watson with 20 points for Joe, 11 from Derrick Henry, 15 from Travis Etienne. I wasn't expecting that. CeeDee Lamb with just 7 points because he didn't really need to do much. The Cowboys defense did all the work. And a smart start for Joe, even though it didn't work out, was Rachaad White. Now, Rachaad White only got 4 points, but 17 carries for 39 yards, 2 receptions for 10 yards. The 17 carries just warrants you having to start him again. You have to start him again, unfortunately. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't want him, because the volume that he gets is his value. So you assume that at some point he'll get in there for a red zone touchdown. But if he goes 2 to 3 more weeks with this very same production, look at the quagmire that creates for Joe. I mean, it's not really a problem for Joe because Joe doesn't really know what's going on. He's just looking at numbers. He doesn't really see the patterns of what happens with players. But the results are the results. And this is why I did not want to pick up Rachaad White. And nothing else here to mention except a lot of points for Joe on the bench. In our very last game, of course, joke's on you. We've mentioned you so much with the sixes and with the horrible poker strategy. 49 points, granting you our very first Tito Award. Losing to Ewok Rape, 74 points, 249. Of course, Joe Burrow with a horrible game, 3 points. Josh Jacobs with 6. James Conner. It's just dark times for Pedro. And we don't want to exaggerate here at the Recap Center because that's not what we're about. We're not about exaggerating. We're not about conveniently predicting the worst outcomes of your teams because we don't like you and because we hope that you die and that your team fails. It's not just because of that, but a lot of it is rooted in truth. It's rooted in truth. The Arizona offense is horrid. It's terrible. It's nothing. It's James Conner. It's Pedro hoping that James Conner gives him the same exact results that he did last season. Let's see, how old is James Conner? We're actually going to Google right now. Let's see, James Conner age. See, this is what you don't get from these other shows, from these other men. You know, you don't get just Google searches right in the middle of everything because I don't actually have the knowledge in my head. I have to Google it like an idiot. 28 years. I could have sworn that James Conner was older than that. I've seen him just for a few years now, and I thought he was like 32, but he's 28 years old. Okay. So he's still not exactly completely out of his prime, though. You know, in football, it's like when you're, 25, 26, 27. He's not completely out of his prime, but on a horrible offense, it's all the same. Jalen Waddle with 7 points. You would have thought that Jalen Waddle would have gotten some of the production that Tyreek got, and 13 points from his offense. Over on the other side, Jalen Hurts, who's going out there later tonight with a horrible 11 points. Horrible for Jalen Hurts. 22 points for Christian McCaffrey. 22 points. What could this man have done on Hensel's team? Hensel picked up Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb should have been on Eric's team, and you gave Eric this tool. If Christian McCaffrey is healthy for the entire season, and if he is, I'm going to feel stupid because I'm banking on him missing more games than Eckler, at least. I'm not saying that Eckler's made out of steel, but if he plays this entire season and Eric makes the playoffs, he has only Hensel and I understand that Ed selected Chase, but that's, I think, is a more logical, with all the mock drafts that I did, Chase was just a thing, the first 3 selections. So I put this more on Joe and Hensel for picking Derrick Henry first and then picking Nick Chubb. I don't know, maybe it was in the other reverse order. Whatever the fuck it is that they did, you had to go with Christian McCaffrey. 3 points from Amari Cooper, who I wanted, but hey, let's see what happens. Ramondre Stevenson, more points than I thought he scored. Look at that, Ed. 8 points for Ramondre Stevenson. You could have had Ramondre Stevenson rather than fucking suck my dick and pick up Justin Tucker. 8 points from Harrison Butker. More points than Justin Tucker, too. He's also one of the top kickers in the league. And nothing else to mention here. Nobody gives a fuck. So let's move on to the standings. Of course, Highlander Trilogy at top of the WCW with a victory. J-Ray with a victory and Ricky O with a victory as well. 3 wins on that side of the divisions. And of course, Rollo Tomassi and Joelicus Maximus with nothing. Ewok Rape with 1-0-0. 2 ties by Plathanos and I. And the winless Acknowledge Me and Jokes on You at bottom of the NWO division. There's really no point in mentioning the top scores. Top scores, Andy with 117, Jay with 99, me and Hensel tied with 88, and Eric with 74 points. We're going to wrap this thing up here now. We're going to wrap it up. I'm going to tell you the week 2 matchups, and then I'm going to tell you to go fuck yourselves, okay? The Toronto Bundy going up against Rollo Tomassi, and I have had a very difficult time with Paul in my fantasy years. I may be wrong on this stat, but I think he's got me 13 games to 5. He is my worst matchup historically, but Paul doesn't have as strong a team as the teams that he's had in the past, as I am projected with 97 and he is projected with 92. Paul, of course, has, AJ Brown and Alexander Madison tonight for Thursday Night Football. And we move on to Ricky O going up against his brother, the Brother Bowl, Joelicus Maximus. 94 points projected for Ricky O and 92 for Joelicus Maximus. Acknowledge Me against Jokes on You. Folks, this is the matchup that you really want to pay attention to. This matchup and the very next matchup. Whoever loses this game is going to be depressed. Pedro with his horrible performance last week and Ed making long-term decisions on temporary emotions, knowing that this will put him on a trajectory to failure if he loses this game. Now, Pedro, we can't necessarily say that. The only reason why we can say that Pedro will be on a path to failure is because of his first 2 selections. If he gets single-digit performances from both Raider players, Mayday, 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 he's fucked. He is totally fucked. And he might as well just throw his hat in for the lottery draft in the 2024 season. Now, the very next game is very important because these are 2 winning teams from week 1 in Highlander, the trilogy, and Big Papa J-Ray. Of course, Andy hiding his players just like he hides his sexuality. And 81 points for J-Ray on the other side. Plathanos going up against Ewok Rape. 87 points for Plathanos and 96 projected points for Ewok Rape. I just asked for consistency. That's all I asked for. If you go out of your way to punch me in the face and I react, you can't get mad at my reaction. You can't take issue with how I address what you have chosen to do to me. All I ask is that you remain consistent and stand on your square and get ready to get punched in the chin if that's what the situation calls for. That's all we ask here. Be like Andy. Be the person who in 2018 was talking shit after having nothing to show for it, like absolutely no results, but he did it anyway. You know, we're not going to necessarily say that that's the reason why he's champion now, but it is what it is. So, as always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their hamstrings, and may your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. Go fuck yourselves.